And in this video, we're going to take a look at Michael Steele and Jack Wombs, the two men who were convicted of the triple murder of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. We're going to look at some of the smaller and some of the also larger aspects of this case and see if it really ties in with what we know of these two individuals.
Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir?
We just drove down our farm track.
Yeah.
Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it.
Yeah.
It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Now, the first topic that I'm going to cover in this video is Darren Nichols. A lot of people in the comment section to my videos often ask, was there really any need for Darren Nichols to be the getaway driver on the evening of December the 6th? If Steele and Wombs were in fact going to go through with this triple murder of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe being killed down Workhouse Lane, then could they not have just parked up a getaway vehicle somewhere close by, made their way on foot and obviously made good their escape? Is the very use of Darren Nichols an oversight on behalf of Steele and Wombs? I can't really imagine thinking that this is going to be most likely the most important event of their lives at this point, Steele and Wombs. You know, this is everything, isn't it? If this goes well, they get away with it, then fine. If they get caught, then the rest of their lives, or the vast majority of their lives going forward, is going to be spent behind bars with their freedom stripped from them. So would you really use Darren Nichols, someone who, I guess you wouldn't call him the closest of companions in terms of Steele and Wombs. Steele and Wombs appear very close, but would you bring in more of an outsider in Darren Nichols to fulfill that important role of being the getaway driver that night? And then combining that with the fact that supposedly Darren Nichols didn't even know he was going to be the getaway driver that night. Surely that is fraught with difficulties and potential danger. For instance, Steele being in the Range Rover, having no idea whatsoever where Darren Nichols is going to be parked whilst he's waiting for this execution to take place, having no idea really where they're going to be picked up from, having no idea really what time that's going to be. Are they going to be waiting around for Nichols to reappear, as obviously he doesn't really see the necessity to be there ASAP? Could he have popped off to the wheat sheaf for a quick pint or a cheeky shandy? It was fraught with danger, providing that Darren Nichols was kept completely in the dark as to what was taking place. And then we have the situation surrounding the very getaway vehicle itself, the VW Passat, that wasn't in, I guess you could say, the best of conditions. Now, what sticks out in my mind regarding the getaway vehicle is not so much the condition of the vehicle, but we will get onto that later on in this video, but more to do with the fact regarding the false number plates. Now, according to Darren Nichols, the false number plates are stuck on just before they make their way towards Workhouse Lane. Now, someone like Michael Steele, who appears, and I say appears as I don't know him personally, but appears to be quite a thorough person when it comes to his criminal exploits, such as bringing in the gear from Holland, all that sort of stuff. He seems very on top of what he needs to do to avoid capture. So would we really be looking at here two people who hadn't even thought about sticking on those false number plates until the very last second when the vehicle's on its way to Workhouse Lane? Would these plates not have been stuck onto this vehicle way before it even got to the Halfway House pub? And then we ask ourselves about the actual affixing of these false number plates. The fact that Darren Nichols then goes on to describe that Jack Wombs tries to affix these number plates. It's cold, it's wet, it's damp, and the plates won't stick. Now, albeit you don't need to be an engineer to fit a set of false plates to a car, especially if you're using double-sided tape. But would you really simply just give up and chuck those false plates into the back of the car and use the original plates that the vehicle was on? Is that a wise move? Is that something that you would do if you were committing triple murder? Or would you find some way at least to actually affix these false plates? And then we move on briefly to the topic surrounding the use of mobile phones. Now, Wombs and Steele supposedly used their own mobiles on the night of the murder. Now, surely if these two are in fact guilty of this crime or had some involvement in these murders, then this was a huge monumental oversight on behalf of these two, and in particular Michael Steele. But for me, where the questions begin to arise is when we take a look back at the runs from Holland, when they were bringing in the gear from Holland, the fact that they use long distance radios, walkie-talkies, radios, whatever you want to call them. Yet on the night of the murder, a much more serious crime, they're actually using their own mobile phones in order to communicate, particularly between Wombs and Nichols, for that call to be picked up. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Wombs and Steele were master criminals by any stretch of the imagination, that they were flawless in their planning of their criminal activities. After all, they nearly got caught bringing in that consignment from Holland. They've had some near run-ins in the past. But would they really be so careless as to use their own mobile phones on the evening of the murders? One point I guess is worth mentioning is that mobile technology was incredibly new, or fairly new I should say, at the time of these murders. But Michael Steele seemed to be pretty clued up in terms of phone bugging and phones being traced, hence the reason he used to supposedly use phone boxes in order to evade that. Yet we are somehow led to believe that on the night of the murders this was merely an oversight, that it was okay, it was totally fine for Jack Wombs to leave Darren Nichols to roam as he pleased whilst waiting for that phone call to be picked up from the end of Workhouse Lane. Now let's move back briefly to Darren Nichols' very inclusion in these murders. Was there really a need for a third person if Michael Steele and Jack Wombs are in fact guilty of this crime? Well, I can see the reason behind it. I can see the fact that you would need that car, you would need that driver to be somewhere close by, possibly as a lookout, possibly as a watcher as to what was going on around the perimeter of the crime scene. But would you choose Darren Nichols to be that very person, the person who was working that day in Sunbury-on-Thames, which is near, I believe, Heathrow Airport, as far as I can remember? It was a very long trip for him to get anywhere near to Rettendon that evening. Would it be him who was chosen at the very last minute, just merely hours before the murder took place, in the weather conditions as they were, with intermittent snow, with congested roads, congested motorways as they were on December the 6th, 1995? Now, obviously, we need to factor in the possibility or the potential for Wombs and Steele's guilt. And if that is the case, if they are in fact guilty of this crime, then Darren Nichols clearly had to know exactly what was going on that day. It just doesn't make any sense to be so far away from the meeting point, to be so far away from where this crime is going to be committed. It doesn't make any sense to involve someone like Darren Nichols who has no prior knowledge of what is about to take place. It is far, far too risky. I think it's also interesting when you take a look at Darren Nichols' testimony as to what he did after supposedly dropping Jack Wombs off at the lane. Jack Wombs gets out, gets a bag and a coat from the back of the vehicle. Nichols turns right towards a petrol station, turns around, heads and parks in the Wheatsheaf pub car park. He has a lousy signal, so he drives up past the lane and takes the first left. Now, it has been surmised in a documentary many years ago that he took the very first left past the lane, which would take him up to Rettendon Hall, but having driven up there myself, I don't see that as a viable possibility. So he's gone past that turning I should say, and taken the next one into the residential area. Now, surely all of these factors have to be taken into consideration when planning this crime. The fact that this Volkswagen Passat is driving around, parking up in different places, could be seen by various different people waiting. A suspicious looking chubby guy sitting in the driver's seat with curly black hair, constantly staring at his phone, looking dishevelled and nervous possibly. Yet that doesn't seem to be yet again taken into consideration during the planning process of these murders. And when we look at the overview, I guess you would call it, as to how this crime was committed, the fact that it was just before 7 PM, at least in my opinion, when Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were murdered. The fact that this was a busy A road through to Southend back in the day, and albeit the weather conditions weren't very favourable for driving, this still would have been fairly busy during that time period. The sheer risk involved in having 3 people leave the scene of a triple murder, pulling back out onto that main road, pulling back out potentially into the path of oncoming traffic, as Darren Nichols describes in his testimony. And yet we have not one verified eyewitness who has come forward, as far as I'm aware, to say that this beige Volkswagen Passat pulled out of the lane. This very vehicle travelled along Main Road with 3 occupants inside, 2 of them of which were covered in blood. No eyewitness reports that I've seen even exist of an eyewitness account describing these events. I went through Rettendon the later part of 1995. I remember an occasion when I was there with other people. They were Jack Womes and Michael Steele. I remember that day. I was working at Sunbury-on-Thames. I had my mobile phone with me. Michael Steele rang me that day. He wondered where I was, and he said he'd like to meet me. We did not discuss where we would meet because I was at work. I agreed to meet him later on that day at Ron Parkinson's Motorcycles at Marks Tay at 5 PM. I drove to Marks Tay and I think my Golf convertible. I've been to Ron Parkinson's before. It sells motorcycles. When I arrived, I parked in the flats opposite. Mr. Steele wasn't there when I arrived. When I arrived, I went into the motorbike shop. I bought something for my old motorbike. It was either a battery or a light bulb. And then I put it in my car. Whilst I was walking back to my car, I saw Mick. I waved to him and said I was just putting something in my car. And then I got in his pickup truck. The pickup truck was a red Toyota, M registration. When I got in, I sat in the passenger seat. He said they were going down to do a deal with Pat, him and Jack. I said, "Where is Jack?" He said, "He'll be here in a minute." I don't recall anything else he said. Then I noticed Jack had pulled up behind us. Jack was in a beige Volkswagen. It was a B registration. I had sold this car to Michael Steele. When he pulled up, he got out and spoke to Mick. I don't really recall what he said. Then he got back in his car. Then we pulled off onto the A12 heading towards London. I was with Mick in his Toyota and Jack behind us in his Volkswagen. I can't recall exactly what was said, but he said we would meet Pat and there was going to be a drug deal, or we were having a drug deal, I can't remember. At that time, I didn't know where we were going. Mick said Jack would show me where the deal was going to be. He said, "Did I know the place?" I said, "No." He said, "Don't worry, Jack will show you." Nothing happened on the journey, just normal chat. He told me I was going to swap cars, and I was going to get in the car with Jack, and he was going to meet Pat on his own. We stopped in a lay-by near the Halfway House, which is a pub restaurant on the A127. When we stopped in the lay-by, I got in the car with Jack, and Mick was going to the Halfway House. We got to the far end of the lay-by gates, and we swapped drivers. Jack was to swap the number plates. I got my feet wet. Jack was wearing overalls and wellies. I remember the wellies more than the overalls because they were new. When we stopped, Jack got out to stick the new number plates over the existing plates, but they wouldn't stick as it was too wet. I saw the number plates he was trying to stick on. They were B registration as well, and they were brand new. When the plates couldn't be stuck, they were put in the back of the car, and he said, "Drive down to the Halfway House pub." I'd been to the pub, only as a child, or driving past on the way to Southend. When we got to the pub, Jack told me to park at the back as far away from the A127 as possible, which I did. I could see Mick's Toyota parked in front of us to the left. After we parked, Jack changed his mind and said, "No, don't park here, park closer to the A127. So I moved the car. I could still see the Hilux, which was in front again, but to my right. Then we had to leave the car running because the windows were misting up because of the weather. I said, "Shall we have a drink?" And Jack said no. Then he said we were waiting for Pat to arrive and to go to a meeting point. Shortly after that, he said, "Right, go." I saw a dark-coloured Range Rover when he said that. The Range Rover drove in and parked next to Mickey's Hilux. I couldn't see who was in the Range Rover. Jack then told me to drive off and up the slip road by the pub and back down the A127 to Southend. So that's what I did. Then he gave me directions down the A127 and onto the A130 to Chelmsford, I think. The A130 goes from the A127 all the way to Chelmsford, but we went to the Rettendon Turnpike, which is a roundabout with traffic lights on it. I went straight over to carry on towards Chelmsford, on the other side of the Rettendon Turnpike. I went up the hill, back down the hill and out the other side. Jack then said, "Slow down and take the next right," which I did. It was a lane and not a road. Then I turned left into a gap to turn the car round. The headlamps were facing the road back towards the A130. Jack told me he'd ring me when he wanted me to pick him up. I had my mobile phone with me. He got out of the car, had a bag and a coat from the back. The bag I think was a canvas, sausage-shaped bag. I didn't notice it in the car before. I might have done, but it didn't register. He told me he'd ring me when he wanted me to come pick him up. So I pulled off and went right towards Chelmsford. I drove down the road to the first point I could turn around to a petrol station. Then I drove back up the road and parked in a pub on the left-hand side of the road. I left the engine running and checked my phone to see I had a lousy signal, so I moved to get a better signal up the road. The pub I was in had a bright pink Morris Minor. I then went past the lane, up the road and took the first left. I went up that road, turned around, the first left up there, then came up and parked outside the first house on the left and waited for him to ring. I didn't wait very long. My phone rang. Jack said come and pick us up, and hung up. I think I might have said okay. I turned right, went back down the road, and had to wait for a few cars to go past so I could turn right into the lane. Then I turned the car round to face the road again. I didn't see anyone. After a short period of time, the back opened up and Jack got in. I didn't notice the interior light come on. I said, "Where's Mick?" He said he won't be a minute, he's just dropped something. Jack was sitting between the back seats talking to me. Then Mick opened the passenger door of the car and the interior light came on. When the light came on, I was looking at Jack. I noticed he had surgical gloves on and something that looked like blood. Mick said, "Turn the interior light off." Mick had just shut the door about the same time. Then he said, "Let's get going." He said, "Go left towards the Rettendon Turnpike." So I pulled out. Something clicked in my mind that something had happened. I pulled out in front of a car. Mick asked if I was okay. I said yes. And as we drove up the road towards the Rettendon Turnpike, Mick said, "They won't fuck with us no more." And Jack said, yeah, it was quite funny, because when Mick had shot one of them, the fucking gun fell apart. He kept asking me if I was okay several times. I realised what had happened, but not to who. So I said, "I hope I don't fall out with you two." Mick said, "No, you won't fall out with us, you're not like them." Mick started to hand over bits of the gun to Jack. I saw the barrels. I don't know the names of the other parts. I definitely saw the barrels. I was driving. I was a bit confused at the time. From the Rettendon Turnpike, we went back down the A130 to Southend. Then at the roar of traffic lights, I turned left, straight to the bottom of that road. We turned right and then took another right turn on or two roads later. As we went up the road, there was a pub on the right hand side, the Hungry Horse or Hungry Hippo, something like that. I drove into the car park of the pub and parked next to Mick's Toyota, which was on the left hand side, and I stopped the car. They got out and I was still sitting there. Mick had opened up his Toyota and told me to go and get in, which I did. Then they were getting changed, sort of thing. Mick was taking off his wellies, taking his overalls off over his wellies, then slipping his shoes on. Boiler suit and wellies were put in the pickup, and Jack did the same. And then we drove off. Mick drove in the Hilux with me in the passenger seat, and Jack was behind us in the Passat. We drove past the Rettendon lane, then Jack overtook us on the dual carriageway as we were driving slower. There was some conversation in the car with Mr. Steele. He said that Jack was a very cold-hearted person. I said, why? He said, well, first of all, when we stopped down the lane, a gate had been shut. So I got out of the Range Rover, I didn't know where Jack was. Then Jack went into the Range Rover and just shot all three of them. Jack handed Mick a gun, and Mick shot them. Then he said once that had happened, Jack reloaded his gun and shot them all in the back of the head. I can't recall anything else that was said. I did say, can we stop and have a drink? Mick originally said, yeah, good idea, as Mick looked shaken up. But as we got to Mark's Tay, he said best get home straight away. Then I got in my car and headed back to Braintree.